you went to the grocery store today. Or maybe you ordered food without leaving your seat. Either way, within minutes, you had more calories at your fingertips than your ancestors could have gathered in an entire week. You didn't think about it. You never do. But the real answer to how that happened is far stranger than anything you were taught in school. Because farming wasn't progress. Not at first. It was a trap. And your ancestors didn't walk into it willingly. They were pushed. For roughly 300,000 years, your ancestors didn't farm. They walked. They followed herds of animals across open land. They dug up roots, cracked open nuts, plucked fruit straight from branches. Anthropologists call these people hunter-gatherers, but that label makes them sound primitive. They weren't. Researcher Marshall Solins spent years studying surviving hunter-gatherer populations and concluded something that shook the academic world. He called them the original affluent society, not because they were wealthy, because they worked less. On average, 3 to 5 hours a day was enough to meet all their needs. The rest was rest. Story, community, your brain is still that brain. That is the one you inherited. So why did your ancestors give it all up? The answer begins around 12,000 years ago in a region known as the Fertile Crescent. That is the arc of land curling through what is now Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Israel. The last ice age was loosening its grip. Temperatures rose. Rainfall patterns changed. And something unexpected began to happen to the wild plants growing in the valleys. Wheat and barley began to grow in dense patches. In the right valleys, after the right rains, you could find more grain than a small group could carry. Your ancestors noticed. They were intelligent and deeply attuned to the land. They began returning to the same spots, season after season. Then slowly, over many generations, they began to encourage the growth, pulling weeds from around the good plants, scattering seeds near their camps, clearing ground so more could sprout, not farming yet, but the first quiet step toward it. Archaeologist Jacques Cauvin studied the symbolic objects left behind by people in this region and argued something provocative. He believed the shift toward farming was not driven by hunger. It was driven by a change in how humans saw themselves in relation to the world. A new desire to control rather than simply follow. In his view, the farming didn't come first. The mindset did. The seeds followed the idea. But control has a cost that no one warns you about. Once your ancestors began planting, they could not leave. The fields needed tending. Seeds had to go into the ground at exactly the right moment. Harvests needed guarding from animals and from other groups. The nomadic freedom that had defined human life for hundreds of thousands of years began to close in. The territory shrank to the size of a field. The horizon got nearer. And the diet got worse. This is the part left out of every school textbook. When bioarchaeologist Clark Spencer Larson analyzed skeletal remains from populations that had made the transition to farming, he found something alarming. Teeth showed widespread decay from a grain-heavy diet. Spines showed stress fractures from repetitive labor. Average height dropped by several inches. Infant mortality rose. The hunter-gatherers who had eaten dozens of different plants, animals, and seasonal fruits across a wide landscape were, by nearly every biological measure, healthier than the early farmers who ate mostly grain. So if farming made life harder and the diet worse, why did it spread across the entire planet? Because of one thing farming did better than anything before it. It produced surplus. More food than the people growing it could eat. Stored in clay pots, in sealed pits, in granaries built from mud brick. And surplus changed the rules of human society in ways that still shape your life today. When you have extra food, you can feed people who are not farming. A full-time soldier. A priest. A record keeper. A potter. Specialization became possible at a scale that had never existed before. Communities built around farming could support far larger populations than any hunter-gatherer band. And larger populations could defend territory, build walls, and outcompete smaller mobile groups who had nothing to store and no reason to fight over land they never claimed to own. Farming didn't win because it was better for the individual body. It won because it was better for the group's ability to grow and dominate. Your ancestors didn't choose farming freely. They got surrounded by it. The groups that adopted it expanded outward. The groups that didn't were pushed into the margins, into deserts, deep forests, frozen edges of the world. Hunting and gathering didn't disappear because it failed. It disappeared because it couldn't compete with the population numbers that agriculture made possible. Historian Yuval Noah Harari put it in terms that are hard to argue with. He wrote that wheat didn't serve humanity. Humanity served wheat. The grain spread across the planet not because it improved individual lives, but because it used human labor to reproduce itself at a scale no wild plant had ever achieved. The farmers thought they were domesticating the crop. The crop was domesticating them. That reframe should sit with you, because it changes the entire shape of the story. The shift to farming also changed how humans experienced time. Hunter-gatherers lived inside a cyclical sense of time. Seasons came and went. Animals returned. The world was a circle and you moved within it. But farming introduced something new. Planning, the future as a concrete thing that had to be managed and worried over. When you plant a seed, you are working today for a reward that won't arrive for months. You are living in 2 moments at once. No other animal does this. And your brain, still built for the immediate returns of a foraging life, never fully adapted. The quiet anxiety you carry about the future, about planning, about things you cannot yet see, that feeling has roots here. In this moment 12,000 years ago, when your ancestors began performing labor whose reward was invisible. The first permanent settlements followed the first reliable harvests, and with permanent settlement came something that had never existed at scale before. Hierarchy, ownership, the idea that land could belong to someone, that someone could own the thing everyone else needed to survive. The first powerful figures were not always the strongest. Many of them were the ones who controlled the granary, who decided who ate and who waited. Farming created inequality, not instantly, but structurally and inevitably. When there is surplus, someone controls the surplus, and whoever controls it holds power over every life that depends on it. The transition to farming didn't happen in one place and then spread outward. It emerged independently in at least 11 separate regions of the world. In China, rice and millet along the Yellow River. In Mexico, wild teosinte shaped slowly into maize. In West Africa, sorghum. In Peru, potato and quinoa. Populations on opposite ends of the earth, with no knowledge of each other, arrived at the same transformation at roughly the same time. Because the climate shifted everywhere. Because the large animals hunter-gatherers had depended on for tens of thousands of years were vanishing. Because the old way became harder everywhere at once. Your ancestors did not choose farming, they chose survival. And farming was what survival looked like when the world they had known stopped working. Here is what stays with you after all of this. You went to that grocery store today, or opened that app, and pulled food from a system 12,000 years in the making. A system your ancestors didn't design and didn't fully consent to. A system that made life harder before it made it easier. Built not on freedom, but on staying put, working longer, eating less variety, and producing enough surplus to make someone else powerful. You are the product of every compromise they made. And the next time you feel that low hum of anxiety about the future, about working towards something you cannot yet see, you will know where it comes from. It doesn't come from weakness. It comes from a brain built for a different world, still carrying a burden it never agreed to carry. Your ancestors didn't start farming because they wanted to. They started because the world shifted underneath them, and they did what your species has always done. They adapted. They survived. They fed their children. And those children fed theirs, all the way down to you, standing in a grocery store aisle, deciding what to have for dinner, completely unaware that the question itself is the most consequential accident in the entire history of your kind. There is one more thing worth sitting with before you move on. The crops your ancestors first domesticated, wheat, barley, rice, maize, did not look the way they look today. Wild wheat had seeds that shattered and fell to the ground on their own, scattering before any person could collect them. Your ancestors, over hundreds of generations of selecting the best seeds to replant, changed the plant entirely. They bred a version of wheat that could not survive without human help. A plant that no longer scattered its own seeds. A plant completely dependent on people to reproduce. and people completely dependent on it to eat. A mutual trap, locked in from both sides, neither able to walk away. That is what 12,000 years of agriculture actually built. Not just civilization, not just cities and armies and empires, but a bond so deep between one species of grass and one species of primate that neither can now exist without the other. You think you eat wheat. Wheat also grows you. And somewhere in that fact is the whole strange truth of what it means to be human.